Hi, it's the top of the hour, and I think that means we're going to get started. I'm Susan Shapiro. I work as an implementation specialist at CAST, and I spend a lot of time in Zoom. So I'm looking for you right now. I don't see your names, I don't see your faces. I'm not even sure who's here, but I do know that we are also recording this session. So I'm going to speak broadly, and we'll have opportunity for some interaction in a shared Google document. Let me just say a tiny bit about myself, not too much, but I want you to know the context for my comments. I began my career wanting to be a special education teacher to really help people understand the child that people didn't understand. And my work led me through becoming a general education teacher because I was tired of fighting the mainstreaming and inclusion battles. I said, just come to my class. I'm a general education teacher. You can be included here. I worked as an inclusion consultant for many years through the University of New Hampshire. Did some work with the University of Vermont in a similar capacity, and then ran a teacher education program at Plymouth State University where it was for elementary ed teachers, but it had all of that good inclusive education stuff just baked right in. It wasn't a special credential, it was just part of what it means to be an elementary teacher. And then I came to CAST, and I came to CAST because at CAST we're asking this question that I think is maybe the best question, like, what is in the way for learners and how do we get it out of the way? We believe strongly that the barrier is in the design, not the learner. And that's one of the tenets of this thing called universal design for learning, that we're going to really focus on today. If you know a lot about universal design for learning, this session will have certain meaning for you. And if you don't know anything about universal design for learning, I've designed it in a way that I really hope it is just as meaningful for you, and just as relevant. So don't worry about the background knowledge. UDL is the acronym that we use for Universal Design for Learning. So you'll see the title, UDL as a lens for facilitating friendship. And we're going to think about this process of facilitating friendship for kids with disabilities. And you can define that in any way that you want to. Over the years, though, I guess in some ways, I think it's just facilitating friendship in general, maybe. So maybe this is an issue beyond special education. But we're going to think today about kids with disabilities. And on the screen, you see a bit.ly, which is a shortened um, hyperlink to get someplace. And I'm going to read it out, and then Sung Park will put it into the chat if you want to copy it there. One thing that it is case sensitive, so you have to be sure to write uppercase and lowercase letters in the right place. If you're watching this as a recording, this bit.ly is a link to a live document. It's a Google Doc where we are going to pause 3 times during the session. You can tell I used to teach first grade, right? 3 times during the session, to do some collaborative thinking. We're going to really try to share ideas with each other and solve some problems together as well. So the bit.ly address, you can put it into your browser, is bit.ly/friendship UDL. And all of that is lowercase except for UDL. So I'll say it again, it's bit.ly/friendship UDL, FRIENDSHIP, capital U, capital D, capital L. And that should take you to a Google Doc that looks like this. It just has our title. You'll see a little picture of me when I was a little bit younger. And it has my email and my Twitter address as well. So feel free to reach out to me after the session with any questions. And you'll see a spot here. It says collaborative conversation. And this is where we'll go at 3 points during our time together to just do some thinking together. I should also mention that if you'd like to follow along with the slides, you'll find the link to the slides here in this document as well. Whether you open that now or you think, "Ah, I wish I could look at that later," you'll have access to that. And those of you watching this as a recording, that is also true, of course. So before we begin, just an accessibility commitment. In the name of Universal Design for Learning, CAST takes seriously the accessibility of the work that we do. So, for example, you'll notice in the slides that there are captions on the videos, that the slides have high contrast text with simple backgrounds. We're providing digital materials that can be used with a screen reader. We've nested our headings in the document and so forth. So if we haven't thought of something that you need to access this opportunity, this hour, please reach out and accept my apology and know that I will do whatever it takes to redesign to make you able to reach the learning. The goals for this hour, and we're going to move quickly and just make sure that we're kind of seeding our thinking, are to understand that with Universal Design for Learning, UDL, we look for barriers in designs, not people. That's really like the center of the whole thing. Like, can this kid do this thing? What would this kid need to do? Like, really just like let that student come as they are. And what can we do in this environment, in this lesson, in this cafeteria, right? On this playground, in this after school club? What can we do in this design to get rid of barriers so that learners can come as they are and be successful in gaining access and agency? We're going to share ideas about facilitating friendships. So before we even, get too far into thinking together, we all bring so many experiences, some of them difficult, some of them celebratory. They're wonderful things have happened in the name of friendship, but we've learned through our trials and experiences some of the things that we can pass on to each other, right? So we're going to take some time to fill up that document with some ideas about facilitating friendship. We'll call it words of wisdom. And then finally, we're going to talk a little bit about potential barriers to friendship. And I'll say more about this, but we'll have that third opportunity in the document to list down some barriers. Like, what are some of the things that you've bumped into when you've been designing facilitating friendships? And then we'll do some brainstorming together. So we'll each have some time to put a barrier down, but we'll all think together in that document about how to remove those barriers. I want to say also that I'm going to nudge your thinking. I think for many of you, I'm going to this content may nudge your thinking a little bit, and there may be moments of discomfort in some way because some of the things I'm going to suggest today are that some of the things we do as educators, parents, and caregivers are actually barriers to students having friends. So, some of the things I did when I was a special education teacher, or a general education teacher, or even an inclusion facilitator were actually the things that got in the way of students having friends. And it was because I didn't know, right? I didn't realize that this thing I was doing was actually standing in front of, right, that opportunity. So I want you to know that I've been in the trenches with you as both a parent and as an educator around this issue of facilitating friendship for kids with disabilities. I know we're tired collectively. I know we're committed collectively. And I know our efforts have, you know, produced incredible results in many places, and we've hit walls in other places. So there is no critique or criticism intended in the things I suggest. But at the same time, I'm so committed to this. And I know that those of you who are thinking about facilitating friendships, that you are too, that I want to push our thinking a little bit because I want us to have opportunity to do things a little bit differently, if in fact, right, if in fact it may be more successful. So we're going to start with about a 10-minute video that was produced a really long time ago in 1996. I was working at the Institute on Disability at the University of New Hampshire, and we were working on a systems change inclusion project. We met Jocelyn, who was a middle school student at the time, and we met her friends and we met her mother. And so we produced this 10-minute video to kind of crawl into what it's like, right, and how it happened that Jocelyn had friends. I will play the video and then I will tell you, I was going to say, remind me to tell you the story about Jocelyn co-teaching with me. But I will make myself a note and I'll tell you that. So let me just change my screen here. And if for any
I have
reason,
friends that I hang out with all the time. And I don't see her as disabled. I just see her as another friend. We sleep out in the backyard in a tent. We go to the mall. We go to the movies. We go to water country. Go to the beach like any other friend would do.
Adolescence is a dynamic stage of life. It is a time to meet new people, discover shared interests, and dream of the future. It's a time when families may take a backseat to friends, and schoolwork may take a backseat to just hanging out. It's a time when friendships can be the most important thing in the world. For many teenagers with disabilities, friendships don't happen as easily or as frequently as they do for their peers. And while this is a complex problem, one solution may be closer than we had ever imagined. We must listen to the voices of youth. We must hear their words, respect their wisdom, and trust their judgment. For they clearly understand the value, the complexity, and the magic of friendship. This video is about Jocelyn Curtin and her friends. Jocelyn lives in Concord, New Hampshire, and attends Concord Public High School. Jocelyn has a loving family, great friends, and a full life. She also has Rett syndrome.
I'm Jocelyn's mom, and Jen's mom, and Jake's mom. Jen is older, and Jake is younger, and her dad is John, and that's our family. Jocelyn met her friends lots of different ways. A lot of them that she met at school. She met Heather at school, and Heather was the first person that actually ever called and asked Jocelyn to come over one afternoon on a school vacation to watch a movie and spend the afternoon with her. She met Kelly and Melanie through school, and they had lunch together at the same period. And the girls had called one time and said, you know, we have lunch with Jocelyn at school and we really like her. We want to know if we can come over sometimes.
I met Jocelyn at school, at elementary school. I saw her a few times. She was in a couple of my classes because we had mixed grade classes. And I hadn't really talked to her then. A couple years later, I met her when I was with Kelly, and we came over to her house. Jocelyn does give me friendship. She's there for me. When I need a smile, she gives me one. When I need somebody to talk to, she listens. One time we were at a school dance, and one of our friends was sitting on the floor crying. Jocelyn reached out and put her arm on the girl's back and was rubbing it. Jocelyn sat and cried with the girl, and it just showed that she does understand how people feel, and she is there for you as a friend. All the guys come up to her at lunch, and they always tell her things. There's one boy, and he's really cute. He's good looking. And he came up to her and he was whispering something in her ear at lunch, and we're all sitting around like, what is he saying to her? And she's sitting there and she's like smiling, and she couldn't stop smiling. It was really neat. We're like, Jocelyn's got a boyfriend. We're like sort of picking on her, and she starts laughing. It was pretty funny.
While Jocelyn's school days are filled with friends and classes, teachers and academics, much of what she does with her friends happens outside of school.
You learn a lot more out in the world than you do in a classroom. I've learned so much, Jocelyn, than I've learned, in my 10 years of school. I think what motivates us is that we feel Jocelyn should have the right to have fun just like anybody else should. And just because it may take a little bit more effort doesn't mean we shouldn't give it a try, because it's not fair that we get to experience all these new adventures and leave Jocelyn behind.
If I was to give any advice to other parents, it would be maybe to put yourself in that situation. I always put myself in Jocelyn's situation because she doesn't speak and has no way to communicate specifics. So I always kind of jump in her shoes and say, what would I feel like? And that's how I guess I try to encourage her to have friends and do things. We'll try anything once. Nothing is out of bounds. They've been out to Hampton Beach, and when I'm not there, they can check out the guys and they can, do the things that you don't do when your mother's there. I would be very conservative and walk along the shore and let her enjoy it that way. They dive right in.
For the first time a few weeks ago, she jumped off the diving board. Marlon takes risks, and if they don't work, then she doesn't try them. But you have to first try them out to see if they work.
She has a full life. She has things to do. She can go places with her friends, and her friends are old enough now that they're starting to get their license, and they feel very comfortable going off with her for a day.
What was the monkey doing? He was driving.
People sometimes don't think that I should be friends with her and ask questions why, but it doesn't bother me really, because I know that they just don't understand, and people are usually afraid of things that they don't know. And so I just kind of brush it off, and usually I just say, well, I'm friends with her because I want to be, and that's just the truth. That's just the way it is, and there's nothing anybody else can change.
When I see Jocelyn, I just see a friend.
She's just a teenager in a wheelchair. She's got a disability.
What? Snap. Are you hungry? I am.
For a long time, it was more one-sided. I would always make the calls and initiate the friendships, the interactions, the outings. But I think it was a combination of more kids doing things with Jocelyn, feeling comfortable with her, and also that they were getting older, that they did things more on their own and initiated things like that.
One of the places where Jocelyn and her friends spend time is at Jocelyn's house. It is a home that has seen years of kids being kids and teenagers being teenagers. Jocelyn and her friends, whether they're in the pool, having a sleepover, or watching a movie, are no exception.
She had all kinds of childish things in her room, and we just thought it would be a good idea that we would change it, so it wouldn't be so childish because she is growing up. So we told her mother, and she's like, sure, so we went out and we bought all kinds of stuff, and we did her room.
Jocelyn always has the stylish clothes and up-to-date hairstyles, and she always looks good, and she always looks just like every other kid. Jocelyn's beautiful, and I've always thought she should be a model.
If Jocelyn didn't have people in her life like this, it's a scary thought. I think if she didn't have people in her life that cared about her like they do now, I see what her life would be like. It would be like all the other people that had very caring families, I'm sure, but they get older and the families aren't able to care for them anymore. And I think they just kind of get lost.
Jocelyn is funny and fun to be with, and she's a great person, and that's all that anybody should need to know.
So Jocelyn's mom, Marlon, has been quite a teacher to me over the years, and a model for risk-taking and experimentation with ideas that we don't know how it's going to go. Jocelyn went on to graduate from Concord High School. When she was thinking about university, her mom called me, and I remember the day really well. I was in southern Maine. I was in my backyard. I had 3 children at the time in a kiddie pool in the backyard on a hot summer day, and I was pregnant with my 4th daughter. And I was on one of those phones that's like not a cell phone, but the ones before that, mobile or something. And Jocelyn's mom said, so Jocelyn's thinking about taking some college courses, and I know you teach a course at the University of New Hampshire. I was wondering if she could be in your class. And I said, well, I mean, yeah, but like, I don't know, my class is a teacher education class. Does Jocelyn want to be a teacher? And she said, well, no, but I was thinking because you know Jocelyn, maybe, it would give her a chance to be in a college course. And I said, kind of like, well, Jocelyn could teach the class, for goodness sake. She's lived inclusive education, and that's what the course is all about. So why doesn't she co-teach the class with me? And Marlon said, I'll ask her. And they hung up the phone, and I thought, I don't know how I'm going to do this, but I'm going to figure it out, right, in Marlon's kind of way. So Marlon called back. Jocelyn said yes, and we co-taught a course together. We did it for a few semesters, and Jocelyn would prepare with Marlon stories on an augmentative communication device. We had a topic like curriculum modification back in the day, and Jocelyn would have her stories, and Marlon would help her pick out which stories to tell, and then she would be at the front of the room with those stories playing, and so forth. Um, Students loved it, and my course evaluations went down, but Jocelyn, went up. In fact, they wrote to the president of the university when they found out that she wasn't getting paid and I was, and said this is ridiculous. But there was one student one semester who was not happy with Jocelyn as the co-teacher. In fact, she felt like it was discounting her learning in the class because she wasn't sure that this person, Jocelyn Curtin, would be able to teach her what, this professor, Susan Shapiro, would be able to teach her. So we had some conversations, but it was what it was. And by the end of that course, I remember one night the Jocelyn was leaving and the student was leaving, and they were talking, or the student was talking to Jocelyn about seeing her on the weekend. And so I inquired a little bit, and it turns out they had made a connection. And they had made a connection that they both loved watching hockey movies. And so they were getting together to watch hockey movies on the weekend. They both lived at home. They both lived with their parents still. They both didn't love that, right? So just a story. And I hope a little bit of a vision for remembering for all of us that friendships can really happen. We're going to hop into the Google Doc right now and answer the first of 3 questions for this hour. Why? Why are you attending this session about friendship for students with disabilities? What is your reason for being interested in this topic? So I'll show you in the doc. Right here is where this first question is. I'm just going to highlight it. So if you jump into that document, we'll just see if people leave the screen share up so you can watch what people are writing. Why are you attending this session? I'll just give you a couple minutes. And if you open up the communication messages, you'll see that Myra has put a link to the document there, if that's an easier way to access it. If you're watching this as a recording, feel free to add your ideas, your why. I'll wait another minute, but I'm wondering if maybe there's a barrier somewhere here. So if not, we'll just move forward. All right, I'll move forward for time's sake, but if you are in the document or you want to get there, we would all love to know your reason for thinking about this topic. So part 1 is really about the UDL piece of this, and that is what I referenced in the beginning, that the barriers in the design, not the person. And how can we use that tenet and think about facilitating friendships? How can we be sure that as we're thinking about how we can support a student to have friends, that we're not thinking about the barriers that student has inside of them, right? Well, students might not want to be friends with but thinking instead about the barriers in the environment, in the world, right, that might prevent friendship and get rid of those. So, universal design for learning, just a teeny bit of background knowledge so we understand this concept, comes from the field of architecture. And you see three images on the screen. One's a red brick building with a circle around a little blue sign at the top of some stone stairs. And the sign says disabled persons entrance at the rear of the building. The third image is the back of the building where you see kind of a rickety old ramp, right? And so when that building was designed, they didn't think about like all the ways that human beings physically navigate spaces. They just thought, well, everybody can walk up the stairs. And then, oh, right, we need to think about how other people, who don't walk upstairs or who don't choose to walk upstairs might get in the building. And they stuck a ramp on the back. So the barrier, right, in that building wasn't, oh my gosh, we've got some people who use a ramp or because they have a broken leg or because they use a wheelchair, because they have a stroller, because they don't like steps or they don't like being near people on steps, right? We don't think about those people as the barrier. We know that the building, right? The design of the building was the barrier. The design of the building was like, there's one way to get in this building and that's the only way. That's the barrier, right? The fixed entry point, the one way, the one size fits all, right? But it doesn't, right? We need more ways to get into that building. So, universal design for learning in architecture is the thinking that goes like this. When you're building a building, think ahead about all the ways that human beings vary in how they physically navigate spaces and make sure that you anticipate that variability in the design of the building. And so you see the beginning, the front of a school here. And in this photograph, you see there are stairs, there are railings, there's a ramp, there are railings, and there's no sign, right? There's no sign that says disabled persons, quote unquote, go here. Just people get to make choices. Those options are there. They remove the barrier of the one way to get in the building, and the options are there for everybody. That's universal design in architecture. We're going to talk about universal design in learning, right? So we're going to put options, just like we have stairs and a ramp, we're going to put options into classrooms. And universal design for learning is said, instead of saying everybody grab a book and read it, we might say we're going to read this text. You can either download it, and here's the link to a digital version where you can use a screen reader or voice to text software or text to speech software, and listen to it or see the words highlighted. Or you can grab a paper copy book and you can read it. And if you have a disability or you are eligible for special ed supports and services, maybe you need assistive technology of a different kind, or maybe you need a Braille version of the book, and you see students navigating that text in a variety of ways. Universal design for learning says, let's not assign the barrier to the learner. Let's think about how to build flexibility into the design. So that same thing we did with that building, more than one way to get in the building, we're thinking about in the design of learning, and not as an afterthought or a retrofit, but proactively. A colleague of mine, Michael McShane, some of you may know his work. When I was talking about UDL one time and I was going on and on and on and on and on, he said, okay, I get it, right? He said, instead of asking if the learner is ready for the lesson, UDL asks if the lesson is ready for the learner. And what a radical shift that is, right? From the way that I was trained to be a special education teacher. Get these students ready for this curriculum. Universal design for learning flips that and says, get this curriculum ready for these students because they're coming. So we're going to take that mindset shift, and I'm going to talk through the application of it to friendship by giving you 3 examples where we sort of assign the barrier to the student, and then we're going to shift it and assign it to something else. So here's the first one. We might hear somebody say, Eliana just doesn't seem interested in knowing the other students. Like, we want to try to get her friends, but she just doesn't seem interested. But what if we change that sentence, right? What if the truth was that the school schedule only provides Eliana and their peers 1 hour a day to be together? She's only in that classroom for 1 hour a day, right? The barrier in that second sentence is not Eliana, that she's uninterested. The barrier is the school schedule. It only gives the students 1 hour to be together. Another one. Sarah chooses to eat alone in the cafeteria. We want her to sit with kids, but she chooses to eat alone. But what if the truth was, right? And there are lots of possible truths here, but let's just say, what if the truth was that the cafeteria environment is loud and fast moving? So choice making is really difficult for many students, right? What if the cafeteria environment was the barrier? What if we could do something, right, to help Sarah make a decision ahead of time or give her some kind of support in that environment, in the cafeteria? To maybe it's not that she doesn't want to sit with other people, maybe that it's difficult for her to be able to do so, right? So the cafeteria environment is the barrier. Finally, Trey is often asked to leave the science labs when they work in small groups, right? We might hear somebody say, that's a great opportunity for kids to be, meeting each other and getting to work together in sort of a less formal setting, but he's always asked to leave. He just doesn't, he's unable to sustain his engagement. But what if the truth was that the lab assignment doesn't really provide students with protocols or structures for working together? So for some students, that might be tolerable, but for Trey, perhaps that's really difficult to navigate, that open endedness. And so behaviors happen and he's often asked to leave, right? So, what if it's not Trey that's the barrier? What if the lab assignment and the open endedness of that lab assignment is the barrier? To me, that's good news because we can change the lab assignment, right? What if Sarah's not the barrier, but the cafeteria environment and the decision making around where you sit is the barrier? We can change that. And the school schedule, right? What if that's the barrier, not Eliana, right? So, those green bolded words, school schedule, cafeteria environment, lab assignment, those are things that we have power and control over as adults. We can change those things. Eliana, Sarah, and Trey, we don't have the right to change people, right? We have the obligation, I think, to change environments where there are barriers. All right, so that's part one. That's the UDL part, and I know we're going quickly, but we only have an hour. So the first part is just to say barriers are not in students. We don't have to change students for them to get friends. They don't have to meet some rubric of criteria in order to have friends. Everybody deserves to have a friend just as they are. The second part is a quick part, and we'll try it because maybe some of you now have found that document. But if not, we'll skip right through it. But please add to it if you're watching this. Your strategies, your words of wisdom. You've done this for 10 months, 10 years, 10 minutes. What have you learned what have we learned collectively about how to facilitate friendship? So let me just show you in the document where it says words of wisdom. What advice can you share about facilitating friendships for students? I'll just wait a moment in case somebody's in the doc. Otherwise, I'll just move ahead. Okay, well, if you're attending this conference and you're watching this session, I think it would be golden if people did fill some of those things in because I know we have a lot to share, and these are hard. This is hard work to do. All right. So this is the third and final part of our time together, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about how it came to be. First, let me just say that in my work over decades of thinking about inclusive schools and supporting students to be successful in accessing both the social and academic curriculum, I've learned that it's important to know what to undo. It's almost more important to know what to undo as it is to know what to do in terms of facilitating friendships. When I say undo, I'm really referencing barriers, right? To remove barriers is almost more powerful than to add strategies. And I'll tell you a little bit about how that came to be. I was working at the University of New Hampshire and we had an intern, and it was in the 90s. I think maybe it was like 1993 or something, before we made the video with Jocelyn and her mom. And the intern was going off to do a training for families and caregivers about friendship strategies. And I was helping her. And it was back in the days we used overhead transparencies, if you remember that. So she had all these overheads made of like strategies for facilitating friendship. Invite kids over in threes instead of twos. Get a swimming pool. I'm kidding, but not, right? Have students
Hi,
join.
Susan.
Yes.
Sorry to interject. Can we please give editing access to the Google Doc?
Really? I'm so embarrassed and so sorry. Let me make sure that's there. Yeah, it should, they do have access.
Huh. We're
We're finding now? Why don't
people
you,
are saying in the chat that they don't have access to edit.
let me, let me grab the link in case
If
we're
you
stuck.
can look into the also on the chat window.
I'm gonna put it to you, and like I don't think I can type in the other main session. So here's the link that's sent to you, Sung. And if you can put it in that general, I don't know why I can't type in the general one, but I can't type in the general one. And to all of you, I apologize. I'm glad you're there. So I can see your comments now, and I'm sorry that I didn't see them earlier to stop. Are you able to open up that link? You want to try it, Sung, and just see? All right, I see some cursors moving, so apologies for that snag. And let's take a moment and just go back to those two first questions. So, why are you attending this session about friendship for students with disabilities? Um, and I love the first answer that somebody wrote, to help my students learn to make friends. And I love that when you say your students, I'm assuming you're an educator and that you're taking that on as part of your responsibility. So thank you. And I'm sure lots of parents and caregivers listening are saying thank you too. Sometimes we hear that it's not the teacher's job. Um, and then words of wisdom. What advice can you share about facilitating friendships for students with disabilities? What have you learned? So I'll just take about 2 minutes. I'll be quiet and let you type and look at the screen. And even if you're not typing, maybe you want to just open the doc and look at what people are writing. So go ahead. I'm so glad we figured this out. Thank you for all your great thinking here. We'll take one more minute, and the only reason I'm saying that is because I'm noticing that it's 20 of the hour, but we'll take one more minute, and then this will be a live doc forever. All right. Thank you. So we were sending our intern off to do a training, and she was writing down all the strategies, typing them on these overhead transparencies, and I was supervising her with another colleague, Carol Tashi. And I just got this sinking feeling in my stomach, which was it's not going to work, right? If a parent listens to these 10 strategies and does them all, I just don't have a feeling like it's going to really result in friendship. And so the three of us had a conversation and we realized that barriers were in the way. And honestly, I'd never heard of UDL back in the early 90s. It wasn't a universal design for learning moment. It was just some human moment of thinking that these strategies weren't enough. So at some point down the road, we wrote a book called Seeing the Charade, like this charade of acting like we're facilitating friendships, when really sometimes what we're doing is putting barriers in the way. And this is the part that can sometimes create a little discomfort, but I hope a little bit of insight as well. So, as I said, we can think about strategies for facilitating friendships, which are great. There are great strategies out there, what we need to do, but also barriers. And what that's really about, what we need to undo. There's an image on the screen of a garden with lots of weeds in it. I like to think about this as sort of an analogy, right? So if we're thinking about planting seeds, strategies, like in a garden full of weeds, they're just not going to grow. We're not going to see what's happening with them. We've got to remove the barriers, right? Remove the weeds. That may not be a perfect analogy, but hopefully it's close. So I'm going to go through about 10 potential barriers, things that might be getting in the way of friendship happening. Maybe one of them I describe has nothing to do, it has no relevance at all for your situation, or maybe it does. So dismiss what doesn't make sense and make a note about what might be worth considering. They're all just potential barriers that we could remove to make it more likely for students to have friends. So rather than just strategy, 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 how can we just make some space, right? How can we move some things out of the way and let friendships happen? So sometimes with one of these potential barriers, I'll tell you a tiny story like I will this time. And other times they'll just be really quick and I'll just name it and move on to the next one. So this first one is dangerous assumptions. So one of the biggest barriers to facilitating to students having friends is that we underestimate what students know and understand and who they are, right? We don't honor their wholeness as people. So we might think about, students are learning about fractions using wooden blocks, and the goal is to build an understanding of part and whole. The teacher might say that, for example. But maybe we hear a student say this: we're learning math, but Megan just plays with the blocks, right? That's really a dangerous assumption. And not the students making that assumption, but that we as an educational community have made an assumption that Megan cannot learn about fractions. Instead, she's just going to be included by playing with the blocks. I learned the power of high expectations. I learned the importance of presuming competence from a young woman in a high school named Tina. And I was student teaching and I was filling in for a paraeducator at the high school. I had background in special education. So the school principal asked me to fill in, and she said, this is the only class that Tina is mainstreamed into for the whole week. So we want her to not miss it. The class was doing this uh, fine fine motor colored pencil drawing where they would tear a magazine ad in half. An image, you see images on the screen of like people, and then they would use colored pencils to fill in the other half of the picture as if it, to make it look whole again. And I thought, with my special education hat on, unfortunately, that moment, I thought, Tina can't do that. And so I got her some huge chart paper and some really thick crayons. And I said, why don't you color? and I aided and faded, and I supported out of need, not out of habit. And when I came back, I saw she had made some marks on the page. So I said something like, I love all the colors that you're using. Why don't you make a rainbow? And I walked away again. And when I came back, and like 41 minutes left in the class, I saw that she had made sort of red and yellow and kind of this large rainbow on the page. And I also saw this: I am bored. Capitalized, the most important word, bored, underlined in the sentence, spelled correctly and punctuated. I didn't think that Tina, who had cerebral palsy, who didn't speak, I didn't think she had language. And I'm embarrassed to tell you that. And it was a really long time ago. But I didn't think she had language because she wasn't speaking. She wasn't responding to me. I thought that a high expectation for her would be that she could take those same like colors that she was using and make them into a rainbow. I hope that is the lowest high expectation I ever have had for anybody at any time. And of course, it's sort of embarrassing to lead a session of with educators with a story of such wrong thinking, but I think it's important. And as if you've heard me speak before, you know I made a promise to Tina at that moment that I would tell this story every time I spoke, because it reminds all of us that we have to presume competence. Students don't have to prove to us their like capacity before we give them access to education, before we give them access to friendship, right? So those dangerous assumptions about competence can be a barrier to friendship. Ann Donlin and Martha Leary wrote a book called The Criterion of the Least Dangerous Assumption. And they say, when in the absence of valid and reliable data, make the assumption that if proven wrong, will do the least amount of harm, right? And presuming competence is the least dangerous assumption. Another potential barrier that we might hear come up, sometimes students tell us these barriers better than anybody, is this: but he's not really in our class. So like maybe you're gonna hear me do a little Q&A here. So question is, well, where is Lucas going? Oh, to the special education class. Well, what is that? It's a class for kids who need more help. Do you ever go there? No, because it's not for kids like me. We all have an attraction to people who have something in common with us, right? If I meet somebody who practices yoga on an airplane, or who meet somebody on an airplane who practices yoga, I might say, oh my gosh, we should get a cup of coffee and talk about what studio you like to go to, right? We find that friendships sometimes can begin with something that we have in common with somebody. Sometimes we don't have things in common with our friends, and that's really interesting too. But when we have an action, right, like taking a kid in and out of a class all the time that helps that builds in the other students this notion that he is not like me, or she is not like me, or they are not like me, right? It's a barrier, a potential barrier to friendship, because we tend to be friends with people that we see as reflecting something of ourselves. When in mainstreaming, we did this a lot in the early or late 80s. I'm going to move on for time. Another potential barrier to friendship is kind of an over-reliance on one-to-one assistance. I remember consulting with a school one time, and we were trying to figure out why the student was always eating lunch alone. And the teachers were saying in the big team meeting, well, they just, Ani's but personal eating habits, and obviously these are all pretend names and images that you see. Um, uh, Ani's personal eating habits, are just not really that attractive for other students. They don't like to sit with Ani. We asked the students about it, right? And the students said, it's not Ani, we're fine. We just don't want to sit with a grown-up. We're in middle school, right? We want to talk about stuff. We don't want Ani's paraeducator to be sitting with us, right? So sometimes we can't remove the paraeducator from a situation for good reason, but sometimes we do have an over-reliance on that paraeducator, that one-on-one assistance, and maybe we can explore peer supports in some way. Maybe we can explore other scaffolds that allow students to have more independence and autonomy. Potential barrier number 4, sometimes we mistake peer support for friendship, right? Well, it looks like friendship, but it's not. Peer support's not friendship. Peer support can lead to friendship. I might hire a tutor to help me in my Spanish course that I'm taking at the university, and we might become friends. I might have a friend who becomes a tutor for me in a Spanish course that I'm taking at the university. But peer support is not inherently friendship. Those are different things. So we hear sometimes students, especially young students, say things like, you might ask, do you know Janie? Oh, yeah, I know Janie. She's in my class. I work with her, right? I work with her. We don't want to hear that. We don't want to hear I work with her. This is a story, not a true picture of Jared, but a true story about a student named something years ago, who used to go out to recess. He was maybe in like second grade. And every time he went to recess, he just cried and cried and cried and cried. And except for like once in a while, he wouldn't cry. So the teacher came up, well intended, like all teachers, well intended. And most teachers, she came up with a list of all the class list, and she moved a clothespin. And so you would have a day that was your day to go and play with Jared on the playground. So she would say, check the chart. Whose turn is it to play with Jared at recess? Well, it turns out as they began to watch more carefully about, Jared's behavior, crying and not being happy on the playground, that the only time that Jared didn't cry was when Eric was his partner, which was every like 13 days. Um, Moral of the story, Jared didn't want a buddy. He didn't want a recess buddy to like follow him around and show him stuff. He wanted to play with a friend, right? So really different there, peer support and friendship. Fifth potential barrier, we think about disability as deficiency, and we sometimes, in our well intended efforts, sometimes we say things to students, right? Or we hear other people say things and we don't interrupt them, like this. Stop staring. You can be their helper. Teach them how to be like you. Remember how lucky you are, right? That really condescending way of thinking about disability, not thinking about diversity as a value that makes us better as human beings and as a planet, but thinking about disability as an unfortunate condition, right? How do we interrupt and how do we help students to not grow up, right? Thinking about how lucky they are. And I'm putting that in air quotes, right? Disability is not an unlucky condition. Uh, I remember one time, I'll just tell you quickly, I was taking my daughters to get their immunizations when they were little, and something came up about sometimes kids don't get these. Do we have to get shots? And some families don't get shots because, of course they hurt. And one of my daughters said, well, why don't they? And I said, well, some parents think that, things can happen from shots. And this is not a political comment. I'm just saying this as a story from a child's view. And well, what kinds of things? And I say, well, sometimes people think the kids can get sick, or they can get the thing that they're trying to prevent, or they can get something like autism. And my, 9-year-old daughter said to me, "That's horrible. That is horrible." And I thought, oh no. She said, "Doctors tell families that autism is bad." Right? So she had grown up with a unique view, being in my home and knowing my work a little bit, but did not see disability as deficiency, right? How do we move in that direction? Kelly, this is a screenshot of Kelly from the film, Jocelyn's friend. Jocelyn does give me friendship. She is there for me. When I need a smile, she gives me one. And unfortunately, sadly, a couple of years ago, Jocelyn passed away, and I went to the service. And Marlon and I were standing there, and we watched Kelly and Nicole and Martha walk in as 35-year-old women, coming to the funeral of their friend. Another potential barrier, this culture of tolerance, right? In our school, we tolerate differences. We hear that a lot, even today. But tolerance implies a hierarchy of value, right? So tolerating, when we use the word tolerate, right, we're thinking about a continuum of things that are pleasant and not pleasant, things that we care about and we hope are true, and things that we wish were not true, things that we value a lot, things that we value less. So culture of tolerance can be a barrier to students having friends. Another potential barrier is us unintentionally kind of modeling this us them divide, right? So a teacher might say to a paraeducator, "How is Jack's day going?" Right? The teacher and the para are kind of the us, and like Jack is over here. The para might say to the teacher, "Oh, this lesson's more than she can handle. I'll take her to the cafeteria," right? Talking about kids instead of to kids, or kids talking for themselves. During a class discussion about European history, we're all talking about it and what happened in France and what happened in Spain, and then turning to a student, do you like ice cream? Just to include her in the conversation, right? But that question has nothing to do with the goal. So sometimes we can fall into that, and students are watching. Another barrier is it's not my job, right? Well, whose job is it, right? To support a student with disabilities, to make and keep friends. Parents and families and caregivers need teachers to help, because for many students, they can't come home and say, I want to invite Anya over. What would happen if we wrote friendship goals on the IEP? What if we started every IEP progress meeting with social relationships? Let's just start there. And if we don't get any place else, I used to tell, teachers this sometimes. If you don't get to literacy, you don't get to math for that meeting, it's okay. Let's just start with social relationships and do a constant check-in to see where we're at and what we need to do. Just share that load. Inaccessible transportation, right? Systems things that get in the way, that can be barriers to friendship. So students can't stay after school because the late bus is not accessible. What if the one accessible bus in the district was made into was the late bus for that route? Or what if the pair's hours were shifted in some ways so that there is an opportunity to have students be able to participate in after school activities? Or maybe there are ways that we can move those clubs into the daytime, or make them virtual, right? Or all of those things. Finally, prejudice. And I guess I've met enough teachers that say this to me that I know that it's possible. Do you truly think that anyone would want to be friends with a student that, and then you can just fill in the blank, right? Hits, drools, uses a wheelchair, doesn't speak. And when I hear that from a teacher, and I say that when I was in my consulting role around inclusive education, right? I think the barrier in that case is the mindset of that person. And if you don't think it's possible for me to have a friend, I don't want you to be the person who is helping to facilitate those friendships, right? So really being sure that we have people who are leading this work who believe that this is a student worth being friends with. I'm going to ask you to hop back into the document, and I'll show you where there's a place for you to brainstorm some barriers that you have faced in the name of facilitating friendship. And also, as you look at the barriers that other people jot down, to think about how we might remove them. And let me show you an example here. So the barrier, I just talked a little bit about this. There's no accessible late bus, so my student cannot participate in after-school clubs, right? And maybe the example of thinking about ways to change it might be, well, we change the scheduling of after-school clubs. We have some meet after school, some meet during lunch, and some are virtual clubs, right? So think about a barrier, and this document will stay open. You can do it during the breaks, during the sessions, throughout the conference if you want to. Maybe people here today can kind of commit to checking back into this document over time. But I want to close with just one last little nudge, and that is an 11th, why did I say fifth? An 11th potential barrier, and that is our response to student behavior. And I think it's one that I see the most lately. Look how everyone else is sitting quietly. Please go with Mrs. Jakes and come back when you're ready to learn. If you act like this, no one is going to want to be your friend. This is not how 8th graders act. So thinking a little bit about our response to how students behave, and I won't tell you this story other than to say this is a little guy in this photo who people questioned whether he had empathy skills, and it turns out what he really needed was a more structured role to be able to have a higher level of cognitive stimulation during an activity that for him was really difficult to sit through, and he used to kick people and do things. So we could treat this story with this kid needs X, Y, and Z because of his behavior. But sometimes, right, behavior is a response to ill-fitting design. And universal design for learning, this sounds like a sales pitch, but really universal design for learning is a great framework to say, well, what could we do in the design of this lesson where Alex is having a difficult time regulating, right? The Universal Design for Learning guidelines say, well, you could do something like provide options for sustaining effort, provide options for self-regulation, right? So if you know something about UDL that makes sense to you, if you don't, there's a ton of resources in that home base. Let me show you where those are. For learning about UDL, also feel free to reach out. And I'll just end by sharing my contact information with you again. I'm sorry that the document was not accessible for you in the beginning, and I apologize that threw our timing off a little bit. But I do know you probably have another session to get to, so I want to stop right at the top of the hour. There are some slides here if you're interested in staying in touch with CAST, just some ways for you to get connected to our newsletter. Otherwise, thank you, and I wish you well. Have a great conference. All right, I'm going to sign off. Thank you.